Medieval Europe holds a secret about time itself. We are not talking about machines or science fiction, but about whispered stories from 1,000 years ago. Monks wrote of vanishing into other centuries, alchemists sought elixirs to bend the ages, and knights returned from enchanted forests claiming conversations with their own ancestors. By the end of this exploration, you will see history not as a fixed timeline, but as a tapestry woven with threads of profound mystery. What if a green-skinned child really did emerge from a cave speaking of another world? How could a brilliant pope in the year 999 possibly know secrets far ahead of his time? These are not just fairy tales, but persistent claims that challenge everything we assume about the past. What does it mean when an entire society dreams of moving through time? These accounts are not about technology, but about perception. The medieval mind inhabited a world where the barriers between times were far more porous than in our modern, linear view of history. To understand the strange stories we are about to explore, we must first step into that older way of seeing. Think of time not as a straight road stretching from past to future, but more like a great turning wheel. Seasons repeated, dynasties rose and fell in familiar patterns, and history was often viewed as a series of divine lessons repeating themselves. In such a world, the idea of glimpsing another point on the wheel did not seem like science fiction, it felt like spiritual insight. This is where our claims originate, nestled in the space between a miracle and a memory. A monk deep in prayer might experience a vivid vision of a future saint's martyrdom, a vision so tangible he could describe the stone of the courtyard and the feel of the cold air. A traveler lost in a mist-shrouded forest might stumble upon a feast from centuries past, the knights and ladies seeming as solid as the trees. These were not reported as experiments, but as encounters, often wrapped in the language of faith or fairy tale. The chroniclers who wrote them down were not trying to document a paradox, they were recording a wonder, an event that revealed the hidden fabric of God's creation. So when we read of a man who walked into a cave and emerged speaking of a city with towers of glass, or a woman who awoke from a fever dream with precise knowledge of a coming plague, we are seeing cracks in their timeline, moments where their cyclical, spiritual understanding of time manifested in a personal, startlingly direct experience. This foundational worldview is the key, the lens through which all the following mysteries come into focus. One of the most compelling figures to emerge from this mystical landscape is Hildegard of Bingen. A Benedictine abbess living in the 12th century, she was a composer, a naturalist, and a theologian of towering intellect. Yet her most famous work, a book she called Civias, which means Know the Ways, is a record of 26 breathtaking visions. These are not simple parables, they are dense, intricate, and often terrifyingly specific. Hildegard described seeing a great wheel within a wheel, spheres of shimmering fire, and a city built upon a mountain that was consumed by a black cloud. For centuries, scholars have debated their meaning, viewing them as profound spiritual allegories. But what if we listen to her descriptions with a different ear? What if, within those ecstatic trances, Hildegard was not just speaking in metaphor, but actually perceiving flickers of a future timeline? Consider one of her most analyzed passages. In her third vision, she describes a peculiar sight, a great globe of sparkling crystal, within which moved images of sun and moon and strange stars. She writes of a brilliance that was not fire, but carried voices and pictures across vast distances. To a medieval mind, this could be an angelic sphere, a representation of the heavens. To our modern perspective, it reads like an uncanny description of a glowing television or computer screen, transmitting audiovisual information. In another vision, she speaks of people traveling in metallic carriages that move without horses along roads that are not roads high above the ground. She details a time when the air itself becomes foul and the waters bitter, a warning that resonates deeply with our understanding of industrial pollution and environmental decay. The debate is fascinating. Was Hildegard a genuine seer, her consciousness momentarily untethered from the 12th century, allowing her to witness fragments of the 21st? Or was she simply a woman of extraordinary intelligence and intuition, interpreting divine messages through the only vocabulary she had, the language of her own world? Her visions of flying machines could be inspired by birds and chariots, her polluted world a metaphor for spiritual corruption. This is the central puzzle. The accuracy we perceive may be a trick of hindsight, where we project our own world onto her poetic symbols, yet the specificity is haunting. It challenges the neat boundary we place between prophecy and perception. For Hildegard, these visions were a form of knowing the ways, of understanding God's plan across all of time. For us, they stand as a monumental question mark. If time is not a straight line, but a landscape that can be glimpsed from a high enough vantage point, then perhaps a mind in a state of divine ecstasy could, for a moment, reach that summit. Her story does not give us answers, but it powerfully reframes the question. What we call prophecy may simply be a different mode of seeing time itself. Glastonbury Abbey rests upon land that seems to breathe with legend. It is said to be the ancient Isle of Avalon, the final resting place of King Arthur and Guinevere. Within these hallowed grounds, where myth and monastic life intertwine, a peculiar entry in the Abbey's own chronicles tells of a brother who experienced something beyond a simple vision. The story goes that in the late 12th century, a monk was deep in solitary prayer within a small, older chapel on the Abbey grounds, a place of quiet devotion. As he knelt, the very air around him grew thick and silent, not with peace but with an unnatural stillness. When he looked up, the chapel was not as it had been. The stonework appeared newer, the colors on a simple wall painting were vivid and fresh. He could hear voices outside, but the language was strange, a thick and guttural form of English that sounded ancient to his ears. The people he glimpsed through the window wore tunics and cloaks of a style he did not recognize. Then, as suddenly as it began, the moment passed. The chapel returned to its familiar, weathered state. The sounds from outside were the normal chatter of his own time. He was left shaken, convinced he had not imagined the event, but had briefly stood in the Glastonbury of centuries past. To understand this account, we must look at the abbey itself as a character in the story. Glastonbury was built upon a site of immense spiritual significance long before the first Christian stone was laid. It was a sacred pagan site, a place of springs and a strange, terraced hill known as the Tor, which rises dramatically from the flat Somerset landscape. In Celtic tradition, such locations were considered thin places, where the veil between our world and the other world was whisper-thin. The early church often built its monasteries directly upon these pagan holy sites, a practice meant to supplant the old gods, but one that may have inadvertently preserved an ancient sense of the location's inherent permeability. The architecture of the abbey evolved over 1,000 years, with Saxon foundations beneath Norman expansions. Our praying monk was in an older chapel, a space saturated with the prayers of generations. Could such a place, layered with time and intention, act as a focal point? The Chronicle presents the event not as a miracle, but as a factual, if bewildering, occurrence in the life of the community. So what are we to make of this vanishing act? One interpretation is purely spiritual. The monk, in a state of profound contemplative prayer, might have experienced a visionary trance so vivid it engaged all his senses. He saw, heard, and felt a reconstructed past drawn from his own subconscious knowledge of the abbey's history. Another view is that the story is a folk memory, a tale that grew in the telling over generations, perhaps originating from a monk's dream or a particularly vivid lesson about the abbey's founders. Yet the persistent nature of these thin place legends cannot be easily dismissed. They speak to a human intuition that certain landscapes hold memory, that time might not flow with the same rigidity everywhere. The monk did not report seeing angels or demons, but ordinary people in ordinary dress from another era. this grounded detail is what makes the account so haunting. It lacks the grand symbolism of Hildegard's visions, presenting instead a simple, jarring dislocation. Was it a temporal slip, a fleeting alignment in the fabric of that so-called thin place? Or is it a story that reveals how, in locations heavy with history, the past never truly vanishes but lingers, waiting for a moment of quiet to make itself known once more? The quiet prayer of a monk is one thing, but what about those who actively sought to command time? This brings us to the shadowy world of the alchemist's laboratory. For centuries, we have pictured these figures hunched over crucibles, obsessed with the fabled philosopher's stone and its power to transmute base metals into gold. Yet that legendary substance had a twin ambition, often overshadowed by tales of riches, the elixir of life, a potion promising eternal youth and freedom from death. This quest for immortality, however, may have been a gateway to a far more audacious goal. Hidden within the cryptic symbols and deliberately obscure language of alchemical texts, we find whispers of an endeavor that sought not just to lengthen life, but to bend the very flow of time around it. Take the enigmatic figure known as Basil Valentine. Believed to be a Benedictine monk writing in the 15th century, his works are a labyrinth of allegory. He writes not just of chemical processes, but of a great work that operates on the soul, the body, and the cosmos simultaneously. In one passage, he speaks of a medicine that can, quote, restore the pristine state of any metal. To the alchemical mind, metals grew and matured deep within the earth, with lead being an infant form and gold its perfect adult state. To restore a metal to its pristine state could mean reversing its natural aging process within the earth, a process that takes millennia. This was not simply making gold, it was accelerating or even reversing time for matter itself. Another recipe, baffling to any conventional chemist, instructs the seeker to hasten the work of the ages in a single glass vessel. What ages is it referring to? Geological time, a human lifetime? The instruction feels less like a chemical formula and more like a desperate attempt to write a recipe for a miracle. To decode these ideas, we must understand their symbolic language. The most potent image is the Ouroboros, the serpent devouring its own tail. To us, it is a symbol of infinity or cyclicality. To the alchemist, it was a precise diagram of their entire philosophy. It represented the concept of one thing becoming another and then returning to its beginning, a closed loop of destruction and rebirth. In the context of time, this is profound. A process that folds back upon itself does not move in a line. It creates a circle where end and beginning touch. If the elixir could place a person within that circle, might it not offer a kind of temporal sovereignty, a release from linear decay? The laboratory operations, with their endless cycles of heating, cooling, dissolving, and coagulating, were a physical imitation of this cosmic cycle. The alchemist wasn't just mixing ingredients, he was performing a ritual to mimic and thus harness the wheel of time itself. So were these texts merely spiritual metaphors? For many practitioners, undoubtedly yes. The transformation of lead into gold was an allegory for the transformation of the sinful soul into a perfected state of grace. Hastening the work of the ages meant accelerating one's own spiritual enlightenment, but the line between metaphor and literal belief was dangerously thin. A mystic seeking spiritual rebirth might use the same coded language as a natural philosopher who genuinely believed a physical substance could alter temporal properties. When an alchemist wrote of distilling the spirit from time, was he describing a meditation technique or a laboratory procedure he hoped would yield a tangible, shimmering liquid in a flask? This ambiguity is the heart of the mystery. Their encoded manuscripts served a dual purpose, protecting sacred knowledge from the unworthy, but also hiding potentially heretical physical experiments from the eyes of the Church. A recipe that spoke of dissolving the old king to birth the new could be a beautiful metaphor for inner renewal. It could also be a literal and dangerous instruction for working with antimony or mercury, substances that could indeed dissolve metals, and quite often the alchemist himself. The quest for the elixir of time, therefore, stands at a fascinating crossroads. It is where profound spiritual yearning collided with primitive experimental science. These seekers may have failed to discover a potion for immortality or a vial of bottled years, but in their striving, they articulated a deep human desire to step outside of time's current. They looked at the Ouroboros, the serpent of eternity, and dared to wonder if a human being could ever join that circle. Their cryptic manuscripts leave us with a haunting question: were they poets describing the soul's journey, or were they the first pioneers of a science that their world was not yet ready to understand? The furnaces are cold now, the cryptic symbols faded on parchment, but the ambition they represent still echoes, a whisper from the past that challenges our own assumptions about what is possible. While alchemists sought to master time through arcane formulas, another story captures the medieval imagination in a far more visceral way: the legend of the 7 sleepers of Ephesus. This tale, remarkably, is revered across 2 worlds, appearing in the traditions of early Christianity and within the Quran itself. The core narrative is hauntingly simple. During the reign of a Roman emperor who persecuted Christians, 7 young men, sometimes accompanied by a dog, refused to renounce their faith. They fled to a cave in the mountains to pray and hide. There they fell into a deep, divinely ordained sleep. The emperor, discovering their refuge, ordered the cave entrance sealed with stones, entombing them. But this was not their end. Centuries later, when the land was Christian, a landowner opened the cave for a construction project. The youths awoke, believing they had slept only a single night. One of them ventured into the city to buy bread, still carrying coins from the reign of the long-dead emperor. The world he found was utterly transformed, a society where his faith was now the official religion, where the very language and architecture were unfamiliar. His antique money aroused suspicion, and the truth slowly unraveled, revealing a miracle. They had slept through centuries as if in a single evening. The story was celebrated as a powerful testament to faith and divine protection, a symbol of resurrection. Yet, strip away the theological framework, and you are left with a raw, human experience of profound temporal dislocation. This is not a vision or an alchemical theory, but a narrative about bodies and minds being physically displaced through time. The shock of the sleepers is the shock of any time traveler, confronting a future they cannot comprehend. Their old coins are worthless not just monetarily, but as tokens of a world that no longer exists. Their confusion mirrors what any of us might feel if we stepped out our door into a landscape 300 years advanced. What makes this legend so compelling for our exploration is its deep resonance in the medieval psyche, East and West. The story was included in the Quran in a chapter titled Al-Kahf, or the Cave. Here, the narrative carries the same essential beats, emphasizing God's power to suspend the laws of nature for those who keep faith. The sleepers are given a divine respite from a corrupt world, their long sleep a mercy. This cross-cultural embrace tells us something important. The concept of suspended animation, of skipping over vast stretches of time, was not seen as a scientific absurdity, but as a spiritually plausible event. It was a way to conceptualize divine power operating on the canvas of human history. The legend tackles the psychological core of time displacement, the trauma of return. The sleepers do not celebrate their awakening into a new world. They are bewildered and seek only to return to God once their story is told. Their long sleep preserved their bodies, but it could not prepare their minds for the future. This reflects a medieval understanding that time is not just a measure of years, but the very substance of culture, language, and identity. To lose time is to lose your place in the human story. So, was this an early time travel narrative? In the strictest sense, no, it is a miracle story, but it provided a narrative template, a shared cultural reference point for what it might feel like to leap across centuries. It gave people a framework to imagine the unimaginable, a story where the barrier of time could be crossed not by a machine, but by a divine breath, placing the human soul in a state of pause while the world turned without it. The Seven Sleepers represent the ultimate passive time travel, a journey taken not through will or knowledge, but through grace or fate. They are the archetypal strangers in a strange future, and their enduring legend suggests that long before we dreamed of machines, we were already dreaming of what it would mean to wake up in another age. The legend of the Seven Sleepers presents time travel as a divine gift, but what about a device built to command it? This brings us to one of history's most enigmatic figures, a man whose very brilliance seemed to bend the timeline around him. Gerbert of Aurillac, who ascended to the papal throne as Pope Sylvester II in the fateful year 999. For centuries after his death, wild rumors swirled that this pope was not just a scholar but a sorcerer. Whispers spoke of a pact with dark forces, of a magical brazen head that could answer any question, and most intriguingly, of a secret device called a chronovisor, a machine that could peer into any point in history, past or future. To understand how a pope became the hero of a science fiction legend, we must first meet the real man behind the myth. Gerbert was, by any measure, a mind centuries ahead of his time. He was a passionate scholar who traveled to Islamic Spain, a center of learning where the knowledge of the ancient Greeks had been preserved and advanced. He did not bring back demons, he brought back ideas. He reintroduced the abacus to Europe, championed the use of Arabic numerals over cumbersome Roman ones, and wrote authoritative texts on the astrolabe, an intricate instrument for mapping the stars. In an age where many struggled with basic arithmetic, Gerbert was constructing complex armillary spheres to model the heavens. His knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, and mechanics was so profound, so utterly alien to his contemporaries that it might as well have been magic. This is the crucial spark. When a single individual possesses understanding that seems to belong to a future era, people invent stories to explain the inexplicable. His mechanical marvels, like a hydraulic organ or an elaborate clock, were seen not as inventions but as enchantments. The legend of the brazen head is particularly telling. It was said he built a head of brass that could prophesy the future, answering yes or no to any question. In reality, this was likely a distorted memory of his advanced automata, perhaps a sophisticated clock with moving figures or a speaking tube that seemed to give a voice to machinery. But the human mind craves narrative. It is far easier to believe a holy man consorted with spirits to build a talking head than to accept that he simply understood principles of acoustics and engineering that no one else could grasp. The leap from a prophetic brass head to a full chronovisor, a viewer of time, is a small one in the landscape of legend. If he could see the future with a machine, why not the past? This myth speaks to a deep, enduring human desire, the wish for a technology that renders time transparent. We see this same desire reflected in our own culture, in stories of crystal balls and surveillance monitors that scan history. For medieval people, Gerbert's anachronistic genius suggested he had found a crack in the edifice of time itself, that he hadn't just learned advanced science, but had somehow accessed it from the future. His papacy during the millennial year 999 only amplified the mystery, a time many believed would bring the end of the world. For a pope rumored to see the future to reign at the end of days, it felt like a secret was being kept from the masses. So, did Pope Sylvester II possess a chronovisor? Almost certainly not in any literal sense, but the persistence of the legend is itself a form of evidence. It proves that the concept of a temporal viewing device was imaginable, even expected, from someone who seemed to walk with one foot in another age. His story is not about magic, but about the shock of the new. When knowledge leaps forward, it can feel like a violation of the natural order, like time itself is out of joint. Gerbert became a temporal wizard in the popular imagination because his mind truly did inhabit a future his world could not yet see. The chronovisor was the only metaphor powerful enough to explain him. The enchanted forest was more than just a setting for adventure. It was a realm where the rules of the world dissolved. In the tangled depths of these literary woods, knights did not merely fight beasts, they encountered paradoxes. One chivalric romance tells of a young knight, separated from his companions during a hunt, who wanders deeper into the gloom until he finds a clearing. There, by a still pool, stands another knight in full armor, the heraldry on his shield hauntingly familiar. The stranger names himself, revealing he is the knight's own great-grandfather, a hero celebrated in family lore for his deeds in a war that ended 50 years ago. Yet here he stands, not as a wizened elder, but in the prime of his life, as if the day of his greatest battle were yesterday. They talk through the evening. The ancestor speaks of his wife, the knight's great-grandmother, with the tenderness of a new husband. He describes the weight of his sword and the scent of the battlefield grass with immediate, visceral detail. They share food from the younger knight's pack, a simple meal that feels like a sacrament. Then, as the first star appears, the older knight simply fades from sight, leaving the younger man alone with the chilling certainty that he has not spoken with a ghost, but with a man alive in another time. To understand this story, we must step away from our modern, individualistic view of the self. In the medieval mind, family lineage was not just a list of names, it was a living chain. You were not merely yourself, you were the current embodiment of your bloodline, carrying the honor and the sins of your ancestors within you. Time, in this context, was not a straight line separating generations, but a coiled spring where the past actively shaped the present. An ancestor's legendary victory could bless your own endeavors, his cowardice could curse you. The enchanted forest, a place outside the normal bounds of village and church, acted as a stage where this deep, psychological truth could become a physical encounter. So what did the knight actually experience? One interpretation is purely spectral. This could be a classic ghost story, a restless spirit appearing to impart wisdom or warn of a family curse. Yet the tale lacks the usual hallmarks of a haunting. There is no chill, no plea for resolution, no unfinished business. The ancestor seems content, solid, and present. Another view is psychological. Lost, exhausted, and steeped in the legends of his forefather, the knight's mind might have conjured a waking dream, a manifestation of his own desire to connect with the source of his family's pride. His subconscious furnished every detail, but the story pushes us toward a third, more unsettling possibility, that in the mythic landscape of the forest, timelines that are separate in the waking world could briefly touch. If time is a wheel, as earlier sections suggested, then perhaps at certain points, the rim touches the same spot on the ground twice. The knight and his ancestor, sharing identical blood and a nearly identical purpose as warriors, might have occupied the same spiritual coordinate at different points on the wheel, and the forest, a recognized thin place, allowed those points to overlap. This is not time travel as a journey, but as a momentary confluence. The ancestor is not visiting the future, the knight is not visiting the past. They are both simply there at the pool because the story of their family makes that spot meaningful across generations. Their conversation is not a historical interview, it is a communion. When they share a meal, it is a powerful symbol of this unity, a breaking of bread across the decades. The ancestor vanishes not because his time is up, but because the conditions that allowed the overlap, perhaps the specific quality of light or the knight's state of mind, simply passed. This story brilliantly illustrates the medieval blurring of genealogical time and personal identity. The knight did not meet a stranger who looked like his forebear, he met a part of himself that existed in another century. The encounter would have been understood not as a bizarre anomaly, but as a profound affirmation, a sign that the young knight was truly walking in his ancestors' footsteps, that the legacy was alive and watching over him. It transforms time from a barrier into a bridge made of blood and memory. Was it real? In the logic of the romance, absolutely. It tells us that for the medieval imagination, the past was never truly dead. It waited in the quiet places, ready to step forward and remind the living of who they were, and more importantly, of who they had always been. A single coin can hold a silence more profound than any chronicle. In the state of Maine, along the rugged coastline of the United States, archaeologists excavating a Native American settlement site made a discovery that should not have been possible. Among the stone tools and pottery shards from the 12th century, they found a small, weathered silver coin. This was not a colonial Spanish piece or an English penny. When cleaned and examined, it was unmistakably a Norse coin, minted in Norway during the reign of King Olaf Kyrre, sometime between the years 1065 and 1080. This artifact, known now as the Maine penny, is a physical object out of time, a tiny piece of medieval Scandinavia resting in the soil of pre-colonial America. It is not a story written by monks, but a mystery written in metal. The immediate question is obvious: how did an 11th century Norse coin end up in a 12th century Wabanaki shell midden, over 3,000 miles from its origin? The theories are as fascinating as the find itself, and each one pulls on a different thread of possibility. The first and most romantic theory points directly to the sagas. We know from the Viking tales that Leif Erikson and others sailed west from Greenland, establishing a short-lived settlement they called Vinland, somewhere on the northeastern coast of North America around the year 1000. Could this coin be a direct relic of those voyages, lost from a Norse explorer's pouch as they traded or explored along the coast? It is a compelling image, a tangible link to the first known European footsteps on the continent. Yet the dates create a problem. The main site is from the 12th century, at least 100 years after the main Vinland expeditions are thought to have ended. This coin would have been old even when it was lost. The second theory is perhaps more likely and speaks to the vast, interconnected trade networks that existed long before European colonization. Indigenous trade routes stretched for thousands of miles across the continent. A prized object like a strange silver coin could have traveled from hand to hand, from tribe to tribe over generations. It might have begun its journey in a Norse settlement in Newfoundland, traded to a Dorset or Thule culture group, then moved southward through an intricate web of exchange until it finally reached the Wabanaki people in Maine, a century or more after it was minted. In this scenario, the coin is not evidence of a Norse visit to Maine itself, but a stunning testament to how far and how fast a rare object could move across ancient America. The third, more skeptical theory is one of simple contamination. Could the coin have been dropped at the site much later, perhaps by a modern collector or even a mischievous archaeology student, and mistakenly incorporated into the ancient layers? This is the bane of every archaeologist's work, and the team that found the Maine penny has rigorously defended its context, stating it was found within a securely dated stratum. Yet the possibility, however slim, always lingers, a ghost in the scientific machine. But let's sit with the first two possibilities, for they are both extraordinary. If the coin came directly from a Norse visitor, it suggests a later, previously unknown point of contact, a whisper of continued exploration or trade long after the sagas fell silent. If it came through indigenous trade networks, it reveals a North America that was far from isolated, a continent where a piece of medieval Europe could become a curiosity, a talisman, or simply a shiny bit of raw material passed along routes we are only beginning to map. This small silver disc does more than hint at transatlantic contact. It performs its own kind of time travel. It was created in the 11th century, lost in the 12th, and buried for 800 years. When it was unearthed in the 1950s, it arrived in our time as a message from two different pasts simultaneously, the Norse and the Native American. It forces us to confront the fluidity of objects. An artifact is not fixed to one story. It can slip between cultures and centuries, carrying multiple meanings and belonging to multiple timelines. The Maine penny challenges our neat historical categories. It blurs the line between the medieval world and the pre-Columbian world, suggesting a past that was more connected, more mysterious, and far less tidy than our textbooks often allow. It is a silent witness that speaks volumes, asking us not just who dropped it, but what stories it gathered on its long, improbable journey across an ocean and through time. The Voynich manuscript rests in a Yale University library vault, a book that mocks understanding. Created on fine vellum in the early 15th century, its 240 pages are filled with graceful, looping script in an alphabet no one has ever seen, accompanying illustrations that are both meticulous and utterly alien. This is not a simple coded message. It is a complete, unknown language wrapped around a vision of a world that does not match our own. To hold it is to hold a silence that has lasted 600 years. Its pages are divided into sections that seem familiar at first glance: a herbal, an astronomical treatise, a biological catalogue, yet each one quickly spirals into the impossible. The herbal section depicts plants with bulbous roots, intricate leaves, and strange flowering stalks, but not a single one corresponds to any known species on Earth. They are botanical nightmares, plausible in structure but assembled from a different set of parts. The astronomical pages show circular diagrams of stars and celestial bodies arranged in patterns that do not match any known medieval cosmology, as if charting a night sky from another hemisphere or another epoch. There are even sections showing small, nude women bathing in interconnected pools of green liquid, a diagram that feels like a blueprint for something organic and utterly mysterious. For centuries, the finest cryptographers, linguists, and historians have tried to break its code. World War II codebreakers who cracked enemy ciphers applied their methods and failed. Modern computer algorithms analyzing letter frequency and word patterns suggest it has the structure of a genuine language, but one with no Rosetta Stone, no key to unlock its meaning. The text flows with a natural rhythm, with word repetition and sentence-like structures, ruling out the theory it is a completely random hoax. Someone put profound effort into creating this. So what are we left with? The conventional theories each have their flaws. Is it a lost language? Possibly, but no other sample of it exists, and its plant and star charts belong to no known culture. Is it an elaborate medieval cipher, an encoded book of secrets on alchemy or medicine? Perhaps, but why go to such extravagant, beautiful lengths to hide information that other alchemists wrote about openly encoded, but ultimately breakable language? Is it a sophisticated hoax designed to fool a wealthy patron? The vellum and inks are period appropriate, making it a costly and time-consuming fraud with no clear payoff. This is where the most speculative idea emerges, the one that tugs at the edges of our theme. Could the Voynich manuscript be a document unmoored from time? The theory suggests a traveler, armed with knowledge from a future or a parallel reality, attempted to record what they saw using the tools and materials of the 15th century. They drew plants from their own world, which appear fantastical to us. They mapped stars from a different celestial orientation. They wrote in a personal shorthand or a language native to their origin, a script that has no correlate here because it was never meant to exist in our timeline. The book is not a message to be decoded. It is a personal journal, its meaning forever locked because the context for it simply does not exist in our history. This idea is, of course, pure speculation, a narrative born from profound frustration. Yet it persists because the manuscript so perfectly embodies the feeling of a temporal anomaly. It is an artifact that feels intellectually advanced, yet physically of its time. It demonstrates a systematic observation of nature, but of a nature we cannot recognize. It behaves like a language, but one spoken by no one. In the end, the Voynich manuscript may be the ultimate Rorschach test. We see in its strange leaves and looping words what we are looking for. To the historian, it is a frustrating puzzle, to the linguist an irresistible challenge, and to those pondering the secrets of time, it stands as a quiet, physical question. What if some mysteries are not meant to be solved because they are not native to our world? What if this beautiful, baffling book is not a lock to be picked, but a souvenir from a journey that should never have been possible, left behind like a shell on a beach from an ocean we cannot find? Strasbourg in the summer of 1518 was a city under a shadow. A punishing heat wave had settled over the region, crops were failing, and the air was thick with fear of famine and disease. It was into this pressure cooker of despair that a woman named Frau Trophia stepped into the street and began to dance. This was not a joyful jig. Her movements were jerky, frantic, and utterly relentless. She danced for hours, then days, her feet bleeding, her body screaming for rest, yet she could not stop. Within a week, dozens had joined her. Within a month, the crowd of involuntary dancers had swelled to over 400 souls, twisting and leaping in the public squares until their hearts gave out or their minds broke. The city council, desperate for a cure, did the worst thing imaginable. Believing the dancers needed to dance it out, they hired musicians and built a wooden stage, hoping to exhaust the mania. Instead, they amplified it, creating a spectacle of suffering that only drew more people into the frenzied rhythm. At least 70 people are recorded to have danced themselves to death. The official historical explanation is one of mass psychogenic illness, a form of social contagion where extreme psychological stress manifests as physical symptoms. Given the context, it makes perfect sense. The people of Strasbourg were starving, terrified, and steeped in a religious culture that saw divine punishment in every misfortune. The dancing could be seen as a collective nervous breakdown, a hysterical release of unbearable societal pressure. Their bodies, unable to process the abstract terror of starvation, acted it out in a literal, exhausting performance. But let's hold that established explanation in one hand and in the other consider a far stranger possibility. What if the trigger was not purely psychological but environmental? What if something in the fabric of that specific place and time briefly tore? The theory of a temporal rift is, of course, speculative in the extreme, but it asks a provocative question. Could the dancers have been exposed to something alien leaking through from another point in the timeline? Not ghosts or spirits, but perhaps a persistent rhythmic energy signature, a psychic echo from a future rave, a tribal ceremony from the deep past, or even a form of sonic weaponry from a timeline we cannot conceive. Their uncontrollable compulsion would not be madness, but a kind of resonant synchronization, their nervous systems forcibly tuned to a frequency broadcast from another age. The contemporary accounts are chilling in their clinical detail. Chroniclers noted the dancers seemed possessed not by demons but by a deep internal compulsion. They were often unaware of their surroundings, dancing through pain and injury, their faces masks of anguish, not ecstasy. This was not a party, it was a prison of motion. To understand how a temporal rift theory could even be entertained, we must look at other recorded dancing manias. Similar, though smaller, outbreaks occurred throughout medieval Europe, often linked to times of plague or social upheaval. This pattern strongly supports the psychological explanation, yet the sheer scale and intensity of the Strasbourg event stands apart. It was an epidemic of motion localized to one city, as if a switch had been flipped there and nowhere else. If we were to imagine a rift, it would function less like a doorway and more like a faulty radio receiver. Instead of clear images or sounds from another time, it might transmit raw, pulsing emotional or neurological data, a pure, undifferentiated command to move. The stressed, malnourished, and suggestible populace of Strasbourg would have been the perfect antennas to receive such a signal, their own fears giving shape to the formless energy. Their religious interpretations, seeing it as a curse from Saint Vitus or a demonic plague, were simply the only vocabulary they had to explain the inexplicable force that had seized them. Ultimately, the dancing plague lies at the crossroads of history and mystery. The mass psychogenic illness model is robust, logical, and fits the evidence of a society pushed past its breaking point. It is almost certainly the correct answer, but the value of the Wilder theory is not in proving it true, but in the light it casts on our own limits of understanding. It challenges us to ask what we might be missing when we dismiss collective phenomena as mere hysteria. Could there be forces, environmental or otherwise, that act upon human neurology in ways we have not yet learned to measure? The dancers of Strasbourg, in their terrible, endless performance, become a symbol. They represent the human body as a possible receiver, picking up signals we have forgotten how to hear, signals that just might be bleeding through from a time out of joint. Their tragedy reminds us that history is not just the story of what people did, but sometimes the story of what was done to them by forces seen and unseen. Their story begins in a Suffolk field during the harvest season, under the wide, flat sky of 12th century England. Villagers from Woolpit, tending their crops near the ancient wolf pits that gave the area its name, made a discovery that would freeze the blood. Two children, a boy and a girl, were huddled together at the mouth of a cave or earthwork. Their clothing was strange, of an unfamiliar material and cut. But it was their skin that caused true alarm, for it held a distinct, unmistakable greenish hue. Terrified and speaking in a rapid, guttural language no one could understand, they were taken to the home of the local landowner, Sir Richard de Calne. The children refused all food offered to them for days, growing weaker, until someone presented them with raw green beans still in their pods. They devoured them eagerly, and for a long time beans were all they would eat. Slowly they adapted. They learned English, lost their green coloration, and were baptized into the Christian faith. The boy, always the more frail of the two, eventually sickened and died. The girl, however, thrived, later marrying a man from King's Lynn and by some accounts living a normal life. But before her green tint faded completely, she was able to tell her story. She explained that she and her brother came from a place called St. Martin's Land, a twilight realm where the sun never rose properly and the light was perpetually dim, like the glow just before dusk. She described her people as also having green skin and living in an underground world. One day, while tending their father's flocks, they heard a loud noise like bells and found themselves drawn into a cavern. They wandered in darkness, following the sound until they emerged, blinded by the shocking brightness of our sun, into the Woolpit field. Her account was recorded by two chroniclers, William of Newburgh and Ralph of Coggeshall, who treated it not as a fable, but as a genuine historical event that demanded an explanation. So what are we to make of the Green Children? The historical theories are compelling. One strong possibility involves Flemish immigrants. In the mid-12th century, King Henry II forced a group of Flemish weavers out of the eastern counties, leading to violent clashes in the Thetford Forest area near Woolpit. It is plausible that two Flemish-speaking orphans, lost, starving, and suffering from chloroses, a form of anemia that can give the skin a greenish pallor, might have hidden in the forest's underground chalk tunnels and emerged disoriented into a Saxon village. The strange, dim St. Martin's Land could be a child's memory of the dense, sun-blocking forest canopy, and the loud bells could have been the bells of the nearby Bury St. Edmund's Abbey. The beans they ate, likely fava beans, are high in iron, which would explain their recovery and the gradual fading of their green tint as their nutrition improved. This explanation fits the facts neatly, transforming a wonder into a tragedy of displaced persons. Yet the story refuses to be pinned down so easily. It persists in our imagination precisely because it also functions as a perfect outsider myth. For the medieval villagers, these children were the ultimate strangers, marked by color, language, and diet. Their tale forced a confrontation with the utterly alien, right on the borders of a familiar field. In a world where maps ended with "Here be dragons," the Green Children were living dragons, tangible proof that other worlds, other kinds of people, could literally walk into your life. This is where the more speculative interpretations take root. Could St. Martin's Land be a description of a parallel dimension with different atmospheric or solar conditions? The chronicler Ralph of Coggeshall himself wrote that the girl said all the inhabitants of her land were green and that no sun was seen there, only a perpetual twilight. To a modern ear, this sounds less like a forest and more like a planet with a thick, permanent cloud cover, or a world orbiting a dim red dwarf star. The children's initial refusal of all food except the most basic, raw vegetable could hint at a biology adapted to a completely different ecosystem. And then there is the element of time. What if the perpetual twilight was not a place but an era? Could their dim world be a folk memory of a much older prehistoric time? A survival from an isolated population that had lived underground for generations, emerging into the 12th century as living fossils. Their story, whether grounded in historical displacement or something far stranger, captures a profound human truth: the green children are a mirror. They show us a medieval society trying to process the shock of the other, and they show us our own endless fascination with the possibility that the boundaries of our world are not fixed, that from a cave or a forest or a fold in time, someone entirely different might one day simply step out and change everything we think we know. The legend of Merlin is a cornerstone of British myth, yet his origins are shrouded in a different kind of mystery. In the 1230s, a cleric named Geoffrey of Monmouth compiled a sweeping chronicle he called the Historia Regum Britanniae, the history of the kings of Britain. Within its pages, he presented not just a list of kings, but a grand prophetic architecture for the nation's soul, centered on the figure of Myrddin, who we know as Merlin. Geoffrey's Merlin is a profound literary creation, a prophet and magician who orchestrates the birth of King Arthur through supernatural means. His famous prophecy of the red dragon and the white dragon fighting beneath a mountain is presented as a vision of the eternal struggle between the native Britons and the invading Saxons. This was a brilliant narrative device. By placing a prophet in the distant past, Geoffrey could predict events that were, for his readers, already ancient history. The dragons gave a mythic weight to historical conflict, turning the messy process of invasion and resistance into a destined cosmic drama. It made the past feel inevitable and, by extension, made the present feel like part of a divine plan. But where did Geoffrey get this idea? The character of Merlin seems to be a fusion. He likely drew from older Welsh folklore about a wild, prophetic figure named Myrddin Wyllt, a madman of the forest who was said to have gained the power of foresight after the trauma of battle. This figure was a seer, not a court magician. Geoffrey took this raw, primal archetype and polished him for a Norman audience, placing him in royal courts and giving him a central role in forging a national identity. This blending raises a tantalizing question. Could the core of the Merlin stories be rooted in a real person? Not a wizard who summoned dragons, but perhaps a particularly shrewd advisor, a strategist or a bard whose understanding of human nature and political tides was so acute it seemed like foresight. In an age where literacy was rare and history was preserved orally, a person who could read the patterns of the past to anticipate the future would have seemed truly magical. Their predictions, based on keen observation and an understanding of cyclical patterns of betrayal, ambition, and war, might later be remembered as supernatural prophecy. The literary Merlin, however, serves a deeper purpose than just recording a possible clever advisor. He is a personification of a medieval concept of time itself. In these chronicles, prophecy is not a parlor trick. It is the mechanism that connects cause and effect across centuries. Merlin's visions provide a reason for why things happen. They structure the chaos of history into a story with foreshadowing and payoff. When a king falls 200 years after a prophecy was uttered, it isn't random fate, it is narrative fulfillment. This allowed medieval readers to experience history not as a random sequence of battles and successions, but as a coherent, almost novelistic epic. It made time meaningful. So, were Merlin's prophecies real? As specific predictions, almost certainly not, but as a cultural artifact, they are profoundly real. They represent a society's attempt to wrestle with the concept of destiny, to find pattern in the noise of the past, and to believe that the future was not a terrifying blank space, but a story already being written, if only one had the right seer to interpret the text. Geoffrey of Monmouth gave Britain a prophet, and in doing so, he gave it a sense of tragic, glorious purpose that stretched from its mythical founding all the way to an uncertain future. The power of that story is why Merlin endures not as a historical fact, but as a masterful piece of temporal engineering. Architecture can be a form of frozen time, a physical record of human intention. Across Europe, nestled within the stones of certain medieval structures, there are puzzles that defy practical explanation. We find spiral staircases that ascend only to meet a solid ceiling, corridors that narrow into dead ends, and windows placed not to illuminate a room, but to cast a single, specific beam of light onto a blank wall at a precise hour on a saint's day. The conventional wisdom is sound. Building a cathedral or a castle could take centuries, with plans changing as funds ran out, styles evolved, or new abbots brought new visions. A staircase might be abandoned when a wing was never completed. A sealed door might mark a change in liturgical practice. Yet, when you stand in one of these spaces, the feeling is less of a mistake and more of a deliberate mystery. It prompts a wilder question. Could some of these architectural oddities be more than errors or symbols? Could they be fragments of a design meant to manipulate perception itself, to create a labyrinth not just for the body, but for the flow of time? Consider the deep foundations of great Gothic cathedrals like Chartres or Canterbury. They were often built directly upon the ruins of older churches, which themselves stood on ancient pagan sites of worship. The builders were not just reusing stone, they were consciously layering sacred geography. The crypts below these cathedrals are often complex, low-ceilinged warrens of chapels and passages, far more intricate than needed for simple burial. Some lead to ancient springs or wells that were focal points of pre-Christian veneration. Walking these subterranean paths with their repetitive arches and echoing silence can produce a profound disorientation. You lose your sense of direction, and with it, your sense of the present moment. The air feels older, heavier. This was likely intentional on a spiritual level, to separate the realm of the living congregation above from the timeless company of saints and ancestors below. But the effect is eerily similar to descriptions of temporal dislocation. If time can pool in certain landscapes, as earlier stories suggested, then perhaps a building designed to amplify that sacred power might also unintentionally bend its rules. A labyrinthine crypt could act as a resonator, confusing linear progression and creating pockets where past and present feel unnervingly close. Then there are the castles with their infamous blind passages. In some keeps, you might find a narrow doorway in a thick wall that opens onto a sheer drop, or a small chamber accessible only by a hidden hatch in the floor, containing nothing but a stone bench. Military explanations exist. A dead-end corridor could be a defensive trap funneling attackers into a kill zone. A hidden room might be for storage or a last resort hiding place. But not all such features make strategic sense. What do we make of a perfectly carved staircase inside a fortified tower that goes up 10 steps and ends at smooth masonry? It wasn't walled up later. The stonework is continuous, as if the builder always meant for it to stop there. One speculative interpretation is that these are architectural representations of a spiritual journey. The staircase to nowhere could symbolize the soul's ascent to God, a path that cannot be completed in this earthly life. The room with a single shaft of light might represent divine revelation striking the human heart at a destined moment. They are theological concepts rendered in stone, yet the idea of a temporal labyrinth is haunting. In mythology, a labyrinth is built to contain a monster, to hide a secret, or to test a hero. What if the monster was time itself, chaotic and devouring? What if the secret was a method to step outside its flow, even for an instant? A building with non-linear, looping paths and purposeless spaces could be an attempt to create a zone where time's arrow loses its way. If you walk in circles in a space designed to defeat logic, your mind's internal clock begins to falter. Minutes feel like hours, and hours can collapse into a single eternal now. For a medieval monk seeking a mystical experience, this disorientation might have been the goal, a way to shatter mundane perception and approach the timelessness of God. The odd window aligning with a solstice sunbeam isn't just a calendar, it's a mechanism to tether the building to the cosmic cycle, to make the structure breathe in time with the heavens. So, were these buildings attempts to create time machines, not in a mechanical sense, but as experiential engines designed to alter consciousness and provoke an encounter with eternity? They might be the closest thing the medieval world ever built to a portal. They stand not as ruins of failed plans, but as silent stone questions. When we walk their confusing corridors today, we are not just touring history. We are walking through someone else's attempt to understand and perhaps escape the prison of the present. The year was 1954, and the setting was a bustling, modern Tokyo airport. A well-dressed European man presented his passport for entry. Everything seemed in order except for one detail stamped clearly on the document. His country of origin was listed as Tord. When the politely baffled officials pulled out a map asking him to point to this nation, he indicated a region straddling the border between France and Spain, the Principality of Andorra. He insisted with growing frustration that his country, Tord, had existed there for 1,000 years. His wallet contained currency from several real European nations, alongside strange, equally official-looking Tord banknotes. He spoke multiple languages fluently and carried business documents from a seemingly legitimate company. After hours of fruitless interrogation, the authorities, unsure if he was a spy, a forger, or something else entirely, placed him in a hotel room under guard until they could solve the riddle. The next morning, the man was gone. The room was still locked from the inside, the windows were sealed and many stories high, and he had vanished without a trace. No credible record of him exists before or after that day in the airport. This is the strange, elusive tale of the Tord traveler, a classic modern mystery. It feels like a scene from a science fiction novel, a man from a parallel dimension briefly slipping into our world before the glitch corrected itself. Yet, strip away the mid-century setting, the passport, and the hotel, and you are left with a narrative that would feel perfectly at home in a medieval chronicle. It is the story of the outsider who appears from a place that cannot be found on any map, bearing the artifacts and manners of a civilization just beyond the edge of the known world. The medieval mind was saturated with such tales. There was the enduring legend of Prester John, a mighty Christian king ruling a lost empire of wonders somewhere in the distant east or in the depths of Africa. A kingdom of such wealth and piety it existed just over the horizon of exploration. Sailors spoke of the Fortunate Isles or High Brassel, mythical lands that would appear through the mist west of Ireland, only to vanish when approached. These were not mere fairy tales, they were geographical mysteries that filled the blank spaces on parchment maps, giving shape to the terrifying and thrilling unknown. The Tord man is a direct descendant of these legendary visitors. His passport is the modern equivalent of a strange coin or an unreadable letter of introduction. His genuine confusion mirrors the disorientation of the green children of Woolpit, who could not comprehend the food or the sunlight of our world. His guarded hotel room is the secular version of the monastery cell where a mysterious stranger might be housed for questioning. And his ultimate, impossible disappearance is the contemporary echo of a knight fading at the forest pool or a sleeper returning to his cave. The archetype is identical, a person from elsewhere who breaches our reality, provides a tantalizing, confusing glimpse of their origin, and then is reclaimed by the mystery from which they came. What this parallel reveals is not evidence of dimensional travel, but something perhaps more profound, the persistence of a deep human narrative. Across centuries, our species has been compelled to imagine the stranger from an unreachable land. In the medieval era, that land was geographical, a hidden valley, an island in the Atlantic, a kingdom beyond the rivers of paradise. As our maps filled in, the unknown had to relocate. In the 20th century, it became dimensional, a parallel Earth, a divergent timeline, a universe where Andorra is called Tord. The setting updated itself from a misty coastline to a sterile airport terminal, but the core story remained unchanged. It is a story that serves a psychological function. It allows us to confront the limits of our knowledge in a safe, narrative form. The traveler is a vessel for our own anxieties and curiosities about what lies beyond the borders of our understanding, whether those borders are made of ocean, mountains, or the very fabric of reality. The Tord traveler reminds us that our modern world, for all its science and satellites, has not eradicated the need for mystery. It has simply given that ancient, haunting story a new costume and a new stage. The transition from medieval mysticism to the dawn of modern science is not a clean break, but a murky crossroads. Here, in the early 17th century, a series of anonymous pamphlets began to circulate across Europe, igniting a firestorm of speculation. They were the Rosicrucian manifestos, and they spoke of a secret society, the Order of the Rose Cross, which claimed to possess a wisdom so profound it could heal the sick, transmute matter, and unlock the deepest mysteries of nature. This was more than just another alchemical text. It was a declaration that a hidden network of enlightened individuals was ready to guide humanity into a new age of knowledge. The central figure of this myth was Christian Rosicrucian, a mysterious founder said to have been born in the late 14th century. According to the manifestos, he traveled to the east, learning arcane secrets from sages in Damascus and Egypt before returning to Germany to establish his secret order. Most astonishingly, the texts claimed that when his tomb was rediscovered 120 years after his death, his body was found perfectly preserved, not as a corpse, but as if in a state of suspended life. This was not just a story about long life. It was a narrative about a man who seemingly stepped outside of time, whose physical form defied decay just as his knowledge defied the intellectual limits of his era. So who were the Rosicrucians, and what were these manifestos truly about? The three primary documents, the Fama Fraternitatis, the Confessio Fraternitatis, and the Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosicrucian, appeared between 1614 and 1616. They did not provide meeting places or membership rolls. They described an invisible brotherhood working for the spiritual and intellectual reformation of the world. To many desperate for change in a Europe ravaged by religious wars, this was a thrilling promise. To the established authorities in church and university, it was a heretical threat. The immediate reaction was a frenzy of curiosity. Scholars, nobles, and philosophers published letters and tracts, some pleading for contact with the elusive brothers, others denouncing them as dangerous frauds. Yet no one ever conclusively proved the existence of a physical Rosicrucian society at that time. This has led many historians to view the manifestos as an elaborate literary hoax or a sophisticated allegory. They might have been the work of a small circle of Lutheran reformers and Hermetic philosophers, using the device of a secret society to safely promote radical ideas about religious tolerance, scientific inquiry, and the unity of all knowledge. In this light, Christian Rosicrucian was a symbolic figure, a personification of a timeless wisdom tradition that they believed flowed from ancient Egypt through the medieval mystics and into their own hands. But the idea of an invisible college is where the mystery deepens profoundly. The manifestos spoke of adepts who communicated secretly across continents, who recognized each other not by signs or passwords, but by their shared pursuit of truth. This concept directly influenced the founding of the first official scientific societies, like the Royal Society in London, whose early members sometimes referred to their informal network as an invisible college. This is a crucial pivot. It suggests that the Rosicrucian ideal was not about hiding from the world, but about operating on a different plane within it, a plane defined by the flow of ideas rather than the constraints of geography or institutional timelines. If such a college existed in spirit, could it also have existed in a more literal, esoteric sense? The legend of Christian Rosicrucians living for centuries points to a tantalizing possibility. What if the secret was not a potion for immortality, but a method of knowledge transmission so precise and so guarded that it created the illusion of a single, ageless master? A tradition passed from teacher to initiated student in an unbroken chain over generations could easily be mythologized by outsiders as the work of one eternal man. The order itself would become the immortal body, with each new generation a reincarnation of its founder's purpose. This frames the Rosicrucians not as hoaxers, but as potential custodians of a genuine, underground stream of thought, a stream that might have included speculative theories about the nature of time itself, inherited from medieval alchemists and Kabbalists. Their promised reformation of the whole wide world was not just social, it was perceptual. They sought to give mankind new eyes with which to see the hidden connections between all things, connections that might just include the threads that bind past, present, and future. Were they successful, we may never know the full truth of their origins, but their greatest legacy is the powerful, enduring archetype they left in the Western mind. The idea that behind the visible chaos of history, a silent fellowship of seekers might be patiently working to unravel the universe's oldest secrets, operating on a timeline all their own. The concept of ley lines is a distinctly modern invention, first proposed by an amateur archaeologist named Alfred Watkins in the 1920s. He looked at maps of the British countryside and noticed that ancient sites, from standing stones to medieval churches, often fell in startlingly straight alignments across miles of landscape. He called these alignments leys, imagining them as ancient trackways for trade or ritual. But the idea quickly escaped the bounds of archaeology and drifted into the realm of earth mysteries, where these lines were reimagined as invisible channels of terrestrial energy, a kind of planetary acupuncture grid. This is a 20th century theory, yet it forces a provocative question when we look backward. If such energies exist, could medieval builders, deeply attuned to the spiritual significance of the land, have sensed them intuitively even without the map? Could their sacred architecture be a physical response to a hidden grid they felt in their bones, a grid that might do more than channel energy, but perhaps also influence the very flow of time? Consider the overwhelming pattern of church construction. Time and again across Europe, early Christian missionaries did not build their first churches on empty ground. They deliberately constructed them atop pagan holy sites, sacred groves, healing springs, and ancient burial mounds. This was a conscious strategy of spiritual conquest to supplant the old gods with the new. But what if it was also an act of profound spiritual engineering? The theory suggests these pagan sites were already focal points, places where the hypothesized earth energy was naturally concentrated or accessible. By building a church there, the medieval Masons were not just claiming the site, they were anchoring their new faith directly into the most potent nodes of the landscape's power. The church itself, with its specific orientation toward the east and its cruciform shape, could then act as a lens, focusing and directing that energy for Christian worship. The sacred space was not just symbolic, it was functional, a built instrument harmonizing with an invisible current. This idea extends beyond single sites to their connections. Look at the placement of certain castles and monasteries. Some appear to form clear alignments across difficult terrain, connected by old straight tracks or pilgrimage routes. The most famous of these is the Camino de Santiago, the Way of St. James, a network of paths converging on the Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela in northwestern Spain. For over 1,000 years, pilgrims have walked these routes. The Camino is undeniably a spiritual journey, a physical act of devotion. but from the ley line perspective, it might also be something more. If the lines are conduits of energy, then walking an ancient, aligned path like the Camino could be a way of immersing oneself in that current, of being carried along a stream of sacred geography. The fatigue, the altered state induced by days of walking, the repetitive rhythm of footsteps, all could lower the mental barriers that keep us locked in linear time. Pilgrims often speak of the Camino as a journey outside of normal life, a bubble where past and present blur, where they feel connected to the millions of footsteps that have worn the path before them. This is not just metaphor, it could be a description of a mild temporal disorientation, a gentle bending of perception facilitated by moving deliberately along a powerful terrestrial alignment. The most speculative leap is to chronomancy, the magical art of influencing time. If ley lines carry a fundamental energy, and if that energy is intertwined with the fabric of spacetime itself, then manipulating the lines could, in theory, affect temporal flow. Building a cathedral on a powerful node might be seen as an attempt to stabilize time at that point, to create a zone of eternal, sacred present aligned with divine will. Aligning a castle along a ley might be less about defense and more about tapping into a flow of power that makes the fortress seem timeless, enduring, and impregnable in spirit. The intricate sacred geometry in the floor plans of Gothic cathedrals, with their precise ratios and symbolic shapes, might then be viewed as circuit diagrams designed to manage and modulate this energy for specific spiritual and perhaps temporal effects. Were medieval builders conscious ley line theorists? Almost certainly not in the way we understand the term today. They did not draw lines on maps, but they were master readers of the landscape, inheritors of deep, pre-Christian traditions about the spirit of place. Their choice of location was guided by a complex blend of practical necessity, symbolic meaning, and an intuitive sense of rightness. They built where the land felt sacred, where the veil felt thin. In doing so, they may have been interacting with a real, if subtle, planetary pattern. Their networks of churches, castles, and pilgrim paths could be the medieval world's unconscious map of an energy grid, a vast, silent system built not to travel across space, but to navigate something far more mysterious, the elusive terrain of time itself. Their stones are silent on the matter, but their placements speak in a language of alignment that continues to whisper of a world woven together by lines of hidden force. History can vanish an army. In the 2nd century, the mighty Roman 9th Legion, veterans of campaigns across the empire, marched north from its fortress at York into the misty highlands of Caledonia, modern Scotland. It never marched out. The legion, known as the Hispana, simply disappears from all official Roman military records after around the year 117. The most accepted historical explanation is grimly practical. They were likely ambushed and annihilated by the fierce Caledonian tribes in a battle so complete no messenger escaped to tell the tale. Rome, stung by the loss and the rebellion it sparked, would eventually build a wall, Hadrian's Wall, to seal off the troublesome north, but the human mind resists such a silent, absolute ending. A mystery of this scale demands a story, and over centuries a legend grew in the soil where the legion fell. A persistent Scottish folktale passed down through generations tells of a spectral Roman army. On certain fog-bound nights in a particular remote valley, the ghostly forms of disciplined soldiers in lorica segmentata armor are seen marching in perfect, silent formation. They move as one, their standards faintly visible before dissolving into the swirling mist as suddenly as they appeared. This is not a battle reenactment. It is a silent, endless procession, a patrol with no beginning and no end. This Phantom Legion does not interact with the living. It simply is a moving tableau from a day that ended 2,000 years ago. We can dismiss this as mere superstition, a story born to explain strange lights or sounds in the hills. Yet, when we place it beside the other threads we have pulled, a more intriguing pattern emerges. This is not just a ghost story, it is a potential time slip, a residual echo. Think of a particularly traumatic event, a moment of immense collective fear, pain, or shock, like the sudden, violent destruction of 5,000 men. The theory suggests that such a powerful psychic or emotional charge could, under the right conditions, imprint itself onto the very location, like a lightning strike scarring glass. The landscape becomes a recording medium. Then, when atmospheric conditions align, perhaps with the same damp fog that hid their attackers, or when a sensitive observer crosses that exact point, the recording plays. The event does not happen again, but its shadow is momentarily cast across the present. The Legion is not there as conscious spirits, but as a replay, a haunting not by souls, but by a moment of time itself trapped in a loop. This idea finds echoes in phantom army legends across the globe. From the ghostly soldiers of the Battle of Edgehill in England, said to replay their 17th century clash on the anniversary of the fight, to the lost patrols of World War I pilots seen over old English airfields, these stories share a common core. They are often tied to locations of mass, sudden death, and they replay a single, focused action, a march, a charge, a flight. They are impersonal and repetitive, like a broken record skipping on the same terrible note. This separates them from traditional hauntings, which often involve interaction, unfinished business, or a specific identity. A residual haunting is impersonal. It is the past asserting its presence, reminding us that the ground we walk on is layered with invisible histories. So, what are we witnessing in that Scottish valley? It may be the chronicle of a historical trauma written in a language we are only beginning to understand, a language of time and memory stored in place. The Ninth Legion did not just vanish from Roman scrolls, they vanished from the linear timeline, but in the folklore of the land that consumed them, they never truly left. They march on in their silent, fog-shrouded column, forever on the border between history and memory, between a day in the 2nd century and every misty night that has followed. Their disappearance created a rupture, and nature, it seems, abhors a vacuum, sometimes filling it not with answers, but with an echo. This silent celestial symphony was more than just a poetic idea. It was a scientific and spiritual truth for the medieval scholar. The ancient Greek philosopher Pythagoras first proposed that the planets, as they moved through their orbits, generated perfect musical intervals, an inaudible harmony he called the music of the spheres. This concept was passionately adopted and expanded by medieval thinkers like the Roman scholar Boethius. In his foundational work, De Institution Musica, Boethius laid out a hierarchy of music. At the lowest level was the music we make with instruments and voices. Above that was the music of the human body, the harmony between its physical and spiritual parts. And at the very pinnacle was this celestial music, the mathematical perfection of the cosmos itself. For them, this wasn't a metaphor. The orderly motion of the heavens literally was a song, and that song was the engine of time. The rising and setting of the sun, the phases of the moon, the slow procession of the seasons, these were all verses in an endless, divine composition. Time, therefore, was not a ticking clock but a rhythm, a measurable expression of cosmic harmony. This philosophical foundation leads us to a breathtaking possibility. If time is a kind of music, then could one learn to sing along or even change the tune? This is where mystical and architectural traditions enter the stage, attempting to build a bridge between human perception and that celestial choir. Gregorian chant, with its single, unadorned melodic line and free, flowing rhythm, was designed for more than worship. Its proponents believed its pure intervals and resonant Latin vowels could attune the singer's soul to the higher vibrations of the universe. Singing in a stone cathedral with the notes echoing in the vast space wasn't just beautiful, it was an act of harmonic alignment. In that state of focused vocalization and listening, immersed in the sound, the mind could slip its earthly anchors. Minutes might feel like hours, or the entire Mass might pass in what felt like a single, eternal breath. This was an alteration of subjective time, achieved through resonant participation in a man-made echo of the cosmic song. Architecture pursued the same goal, but in stone and light. The soaring vaults and precise proportions of a Gothic cathedral were not arbitrary. Builders used sacred geometry, ratios like the golden mean, which were believed to reflect the same mathematical principles governing planetary orbits. When you stand in the nave of Chartres Cathedral, your eyes drawn up along the ribs of the vault to a distant point of light, you are standing inside a frozen chord. The structure itself is an instrument designed to resonate with the music of the spheres. The filtered light through stained glass windows, casting colored patterns that move slowly across the floor with the sun, makes the celestial dance visible. Within such a space, engineered to harmonize with the universe, the very concept of linear, hurried time could feel alien, even profane. You are in a bubble of sacred time, a time measured in heartbeats and breath, synced to a slower, grander rhythm. This vision transforms time from a line into a layered harmony. The past, present, and future were not separate points, but concurrent notes in a chord, all sounding together in the mind of the divine. To access a moment of the past or a vision of the future was not to travel a distance, but to adjust your perception, to tune your consciousness to a different frequency within the everlasting song. The mystic, deep in prayer, or the architect calculating the rise of an arch, were both engaged in the same profound work, trying to build a ladder of harmony that the human soul could climb, if only for a moment, to listen to the music that writes all of history. St. Dunstan's legend is a story of metal, magic, and measured time. As the tale goes, this 10th century archbishop and master metalsmith forged a clock of such complexity it seemed to hold a sliver of divine intelligence within its gears. It did not merely mark the hours, its chimes, they said, could foretell coming storms. Its dials, in some whispered versions, might even flicker with images of events unfolding in faraway lands, or perhaps of moments not yet born. Now, we know mechanical clocks of such sophistication did not arrive in England for centuries, making this an obvious anachronism. But that is precisely why the story is so revealing. It is not a record of fact, but a projection of deep desire. In a world where time was felt in seasons and prayer cycles, the idea of capturing it in a machine, of making its flow visible, predictable, and even manipulable, was a profound fantasy. Dunstan, already a saint credited with miraculous powers, became the perfect vessel for this dream. If a holy man could commune with angels, why could he not also build a device to commune with tomorrow? The legend transforms time from a river into a mechanism, something that could be understood, taken apart, and reassembled by a mind brilliant enough to see its workings. This speaks directly to that medieval urge to bring the greatest mysteries down to human scale, to find the lever and the gear that could move the universe. Dunstan's clock is a metaphor made of brass and ambition. It represents the moment when the human imagination began to conceive of time not just as a spiritual force, but as a system that could, in theory, be engineered. The solidity of history itself can feel like an illusion. We trust the timeline, that steady march of centuries documented in chronicles and carved into stone. But what if a portion of that timeline is not just misunderstood, but entirely fictional? In the 1990s, a German historian named Heribert Illig proposed a theory so radical it seems to belong in a conspiracy thriller. He called it the phantom time hypothesis. In essence, Illig claimed that 297 years of history, specifically the period between 614 and 911, never actually happened. According to his calculations, we are not living in the 21st century, but somewhere closer to the early 1700s. The calendar, he argued, contains a vast invented gap. To understand how anyone could propose such an idea, we must look at the evidence Illig presented, which he pulled from perceived inconsistencies in the record. He pointed to a startling scarcity of original architecture from those 3 centuries in Europe. suggesting the physical proof on the ground does not match the written account. He questioned the sudden, seemingly overnight reform of the calendar by Pope Gregory XIII in 1582, which required a correction of 10 days. Illig wondered if this was not just a correction for astronomical drift, but a clumsy attempt to paper over a much larger chronological error that had accumulated. He also analyzed certain historical figures like the Emperor Charlemagne, arguing that his legendary reign and accomplishments feel more like a composite myth, a story compiled from multiple eras, than a coherent biography from a single lifetime. For Illig, these were not mere gaps but the seams of a fabrication. The theory proposes that this phantom time was inserted, possibly by medieval scribes and rulers conspiring to legitimize the Holy Roman Empire by artificially extending its lineage back to the Roman era, or by the Church to align history with prophetic timeline. It is a narrative of a grand, centuries-long forgery. Now, before we get swept away, we must confront the overwhelming scholarly consensus that rejects this hypothesis. Historians and scientists have dismantled its foundations point by point. The architectural record is not empty. There are buildings, coins, and artifacts that securely date to those centuries, especially in the Byzantine and Islamic worlds, whose detailed, independent chronologies perfectly align with our own. Astronomical observations recorded by Chinese, Arabic, and Mayan cultures during the supposed phantom centuries, such as detailed accounts of comets and eclipses, match celestial mechanics when plotted on our standard timeline. They would be inexplicable if those years were fiction. The Gregorian calendar correction is fully explained by the inaccuracy of the old Julian calendar, which had slowly drifted out of sync with the solar year. As for Charlemagne, while his legend is certainly embellished, the documentary evidence for his rule from multiple, geographically separate sources is simply too vast and consistent to be a wholesale invention. So why does the phantom time hypothesis fascinate us if it is almost certainly wrong? Its power lies not as history but as a philosophical provocation. It forces us to perform a breathtaking act of doubt. It asks us to look at the scaffold of recorded time and consider that it might be built in part on air. This is the ultimate secret hiding in plain sight, not a hidden event but the potential absence of 300 years. While the evidence firmly places it in the realm of speculation, the theory succeeds in making the familiar strange. It turns our calendar from a transparent window into a potential hall of mirrors. For a moment, we are invited to stand outside of history and wonder, how do we really know the past is what we say it is? The hypothesis may fail as fact, but it triumphs as a question, echoing the very medieval mindset we have explored. A mindset that always sensed time was not a fixed road, but a story, and stories, as we know, can sometimes be edited. A splinter of wood, a fragment of bone, these were not mere keepsakes to the medieval believer. They were portals. The veneration of relics stands as one of the most powerful expressions of how the medieval world sought to collapse the distance of centuries. In every cathedral and parish church behind ornate altars, rested objects believed to carry the living presence of a saint or a direct connection to the life of Christ. A pilgrim traveling hundreds of miles to kneel before the skull of a martyr was not undertaking a historical tour. They were seeking an encounter, a moment where time would fold, allowing them to touch the sacred past with their own hands. This was spiritual time travel made tangible through a physical object. The theology behind it was profound. Since saints were believed to be alive in heaven, existing in God's eternal present, their earthly remains participated in that timelessness. A relic was not a dead thing, but a point of contact, a thread pulled taut between the eternal and the now. When a sick person touched a reliquary containing a saint's finger bone, they were not asking history for help. They were reaching directly into the eternal company of heaven, where that saint lived outside of time, and pleading for intercession. The relic made that impossible reach possible. It served as a divine antenna, a focal point where the power of a past holy life could broadcast into the present need. This belief transformed geography and architecture. Pilgrimage routes like the Camino de Santiago were essentially highways through time, leading to a destination where the Apostle James was not a figure from the 1st century, but a living presence residing in his own bones. The cathedral built to house those bones was not a museum. It was a terminal, a station where timelines converged. The very act of journeying, of suffering blisters and hardship along the way, was a ritual of stripping away the mundane present to become receptive to that timeless moment of arrival. Consider the most coveted relics of all, those associated with the Passion of Christ. Fragments of the true cross, nails from the crucifixion, even the Holy Grail. These were objects believed to be soaked in the moment of humanity's redemption. To venerate a piece of the true cross was not to remember a tragedy that happened long ago. It was to stand at the foot of the cross itself, to be present at the central event of cosmic history. The relic collapsed 1,500 years into a single, shattering now. This practice reveals a mindset where time was not a barrier to spiritual reality, but a dimension that could be traversed through faith and focused devotion. The object itself, whether genuine or not, was the key. It provided the concrete focus the human mind needs to grasp the abstract. You cannot easily pray to a century, but you can pray to a tooth in a golden box and through it feel the century dissolve. The power of the relic was in its ability to make the distant immediate, to make the invisible tangible. It answered a deep human hunger to connect, not just with a story, but with the substance of that story. In a world without photographs or recordings, the relic was the ultimate authentic artifact, a direct download from a holy moment. This devotional time travel had a communal dimension as well. During a feast day, when a relic was paraded through the streets, the entire town became participants in a shared temporal shift. They were not spectators to history, they were welcoming the saint back into their midst. The cheers, the prayers, the ringing bells all served to blur the lines between then and now, declaring that the saint's power was not locked in the past but alive and active in their very streets. So, while we may look at these practices and see superstition or clever church economics, to the medieval mind, it was a logical, beautiful system. If God existed outside of time, and if his saints shared in that eternity, then why couldn't a piece of their earthly journey serve as a doorway? The relic was that doorway, a humble, often gruesome object that promised the faithful they were never separated from the moments of grace that shaped their world. It was the ultimate proof that in the realm of the spirit, the past is never truly past. It is always waiting just on the other side of a touch, a prayer, a fragment of bone. Sleep itself was considered a doorway. In the quiet hours of the night when the body lay still, the medieval mind believed the soul could slip its moorings and journey. This wasn't just fantasy, it was the foundation of an entire literary genre that dominated the period, the dream vision. From Geoffrey Chaucer's intricate The Parliament of Fowls to the haunting, grief-stricken beauty of the anonymous poem Pearl, these works used the simple act of falling asleep as the most powerful engine for narrative travel. The narrator, often a troubled or seeking figure, closes their eyes in a world of mundane concerns and opens them in a realm of pure symbol and meaning. A garden walled with emerald, a parliament of birds debating love, a crystalline landscape across a mystical stream. These were not settings for escape, but arenas for profound revelation. The dream vision was the medieval era's built-in virtual reality, a narrative device that allowed writers and readers to explore concepts too vast or too sacred for waking logic. It was a direct line to timeless truths, a way to visualize the architecture of the divine, the mechanics of the soul, and the very nature of reality itself. In these allegorical landscapes, time behaved differently. Past, present, and future could coexist in a single conversation. A dreamer might meet figures from ancient philosophy, receive warnings about their personal future, or be shown the eternal consequences of their present choices, all within the compressed, potent space of a single night's sleep. This reflects a psychological understanding far removed from our modern view of dreams as random neural static. For the medieval thinker, dreams were messages. They could be sent by God, by angels, or by one's own deeper spirit, and they required interpretation, much like the cryptic manuscripts of the alchemists. The dream landscape was a real place, another layer of existence that the soul could visit. So when we read of the dreamer in pearl crossing a stream to speak with his lost daughter, now a radiant being in a heavenly court, we are witnessing more than a metaphor for grief. We are seeing a detailed report from a frontier, a claim that the barrier between the living and the dead, between the temporal and the eternal, is permeable in sleep. This brings us to a compelling parallel. Was the medieval dream vision a form of astral projection or temporal tourism? The descriptions are often startlingly vivid, full of specific sensory details, the feel of grass, the sound of water, the precise layout of a castle. The dreamer isn't a passive viewer. They walk, they touch, they engage in complex debate. This active participation mirrors many contemporary accounts of out-of-body experiences or lucid dreams, where the traveler feels a potent sense of reality and agency. The key difference is the medieval framework of meaning. Every element in a dream vision, from a talking eagle to a weeping willow, was a piece of a coded lesson. The journey was not for sightseeing, but for education of the soul. It was temporal tourism with a sacred purpose, a guided tour of the cosmos's deeper blueprint. Consider Chaucer's The Parliament of Fowls. The narrator falls asleep reading about ancient dreams and finds himself led by Scipio Africanus through a gate into a garden of love. He observes a formal debate among birds of all stations, from noble eagles to common waterfowl, all choosing their mates on Valentine's Day. On one level, it's a witty social commentary. On another, it's a profound exploration of natural law, divine order, and the different forms love takes. The dream framework allows Chaucer to place classical philosophy, contemporary courtly love ideals, and raw natural instinct in the same room, letting them argue. Time collapses. Cicero speaks to 14th century English courtiers through the medium of birds. The dream becomes a neutral, timeless theater where the great ideas of human history can be staged and compared. This literary device reveals a breathtaking confidence in the accessibility of other realms. You didn't need a chronovisor or an alchemical elixir. You simply needed to lie down, close your eyes, and be receptive. The portal was inside the human mind, a built-in feature of our spiritual hardware. The dream vision genre, therefore, is perhaps the most intimate and widespread evidence of the medieval time travel mindset. It was democratized, available to every sleeper, and codified by every major poet. It taught that the soul was inherently mobile, that the borders of the self were not the borders of the possible. In the silent, dark theater of the night, the past could counsel, the future could warn, and eternity could comfort. The dream was not an alternative to reality. It was a deeper layer of it, a hidden country where the rules of hours and years no longer applied, and where the deepest secrets were not found in machines but in the quiet, traveling heart. These scattered fragments begin to form a startling mosaic. From the green children emerging from a cave to the knight meeting his ancestor in a forest clearing, from the relic that collapses centuries to the dream that visits eternity, a clear pattern of thresholds emerges. Caves, forests, crypts, even the state of sleep itself, these were the medieval world's recognized liminal spaces, places and states of being that existed on the border between the known and the unknown. They were not just settings for adventure, they were the proposed entry points. The consistent message is that to step outside of time, you must first step outside of the ordinary human community, into a geography of the margin. This is matched by another pattern, the holy individual as a conduit. Hildegard in her visions, the monk in prayer at Glastonbury, the saint whose bones bridge heaven and earth, these figures were seen as living thin places themselves. Their intense spiritual focus, it was believed, could soften the barrier between ages, making them receivers or perhaps even broadcasters of information across the timeline. Their advanced knowledge, like Gerbert's mathematics, simply seemed like magic to their contemporaries, a logical conclusion if you believe someone is tapping into a source beyond the present. And then we have the artifacts, the main penny, the Voynich manuscript, objects that feel unmoored, carrying the signature of a world that does not fit. So what do we do with these recurring motifs? Are they just the common furniture of myth, recycled endlessly because they resonate with basic human fears and wonders? That is one powerful explanation. The cave is a universal symbol of the womb and the tomb, of going inward to be reborn. The forest represents the wild, untamed, unconscious. The holy person represents our hope that someone, somewhere, can see the bigger picture. These stories could be purely metaphorical, beautiful, intricate attempts to explain the unexplainable aspects of human consciousness, prophecy, and déjà vu using the language of their day. They are psychology dressed in the garb of miracle. Yet there is another possibility, more subtle and perhaps more profound. What if these stories are not about time travel as a physical journey, but as a perceptual shift? What if they hint at a forgotten paradigm, a way of experiencing reality where time was not the rigid, linear construct we have built today? We live in a world measured by clocks and calendars, a world that insists cause must always precede effect in a neat, unbroken chain. But the medieval worldview, infused with faith and a cyclical view of history, may have allowed for a more fluid, participatory relationship with time. In a universe where God exists in an eternal now, where every Mass is a participation in the one sacrifice of Christ, the past was not a locked room. It was a living layer, accessible through prayer, vision, and sacred place. Their stories might be records of moments when that theological truth became a personal, shocking experience. A man praying in a chapel doesn't just remember the past, he briefly inhabits it. A woman in a trance doesn't just imagine the future, she glimpses a page from a book still being written. This doesn't require machines or paradoxes. It requires a different set of assumptions about how consciousness interacts with the fabric of creation. Were medieval people simply more open to experiences that we now rationalize away as hallucination, coincidence, or mental illness? Quite possibly. Without a scientific framework to explain every anomaly, the default interpretation leaned toward the wondrous, the divine, or the magical. A vivid dream was a message, not a random firing of neurons. A feeling of profound familiarity in a new place was a memory of a past life or a temporal echo, not a trick of the brain. Their framework allowed for mystery as a valid category of experience. Our framework seeks to dissolve mystery into component parts. Neither approach is entirely right or wrong, but they produce very different stories. So, this exploration does not seek to prove that medieval people had secret time machines. Instead, it reveals something perhaps more valuable about the human spirit. These persistent claims show us a culture grappling with the deepest questions of existence, identity, and memory. They use the concept of moving through time to explore the idea that the past defines us, that the future is knowable, and that the present is not a prison. The Green Child, the Phantom Legion, the prophetic dream, these are all ways of saying that the walls of our moment are thinner than we think. They tell us that long before science fiction, humanity was already dreaming of liberation from time's arrow, crafting stories where the greatest adventure was not to travel to a new place but to a new when. In the end, these mysteries are less about medieval technology and more about medieval hope. A hope that the story of the world is not yet finished and that we might, in our most profound moments, read a line from a chapter far ahead or far behind. The secret may not lie in forgotten machines, but in a forgotten mindset, For the medieval world, time was not a solitary arrow flying forward, it was a chorus. It was the rhythm of the seasons, the cycle of the liturgy, the echo of prophecy, and the immediacy of a saint's relic, all singing together. Our exploration reveals that these persistent claims of temporal voyages are not failed science, but a different kind of truth. They are the language of a culture that experienced reality as layered, where the spiritual and the historical were threads in the same fabric. A dream was a message, a vision was a destination, and a holy site was a crossroads where centuries could meet. This way of seeing did not separate memory from prophecy or miracle from event. It wove them into a single, meaningful story. History, to them, was not a dead record, but a living conversation with the past, present, and future all at once. So, whether we view the Green Children as displaced orphans, Hildegard's visions as brilliant metaphor, or the Phantom Legion as a geological echo, their power endures. They are more than just stories, they are invitations. They ask us to loosen our grip on the rigid timeline and consider a more fluid, mysterious past. They challenge the modern arrogance that assumes we have fully mapped the territory of human experience, perhaps in our own moments of profound déjà vu, in a place that feels eerily familiar for no reason, or in a dream that carries the weight of memory. We brush against that older, more porous understanding. What do you think lies at the heart of these enduring mysteries? Have you ever stood somewhere and felt the unmistakable, haunting pull of another time? Share your own stories and reflections in the comments below. If this journey through the whispers of history resonated with you, please give the video a like, it truly helps. And subscribe to join us as we continue to question the past and explore the shadows at the edges of the map. Until next time, keep wondering.